He rewrote the lyrics to Pennyroyal Tea 7 times. The notebook pages show each version crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. The final version was never recorded. He crossed out the first line, then rewrote it, then crossed it out again, 7 times. 7 complete rewrites of the same song. And when the band finally went into the studio to record it, Kurt Cobain sang completely different lyrics. Lyrics that don't appear in any of his notebooks. Lyrics he never wrote down. The notebook sits in an archive now. Page 43 of his 1993 journal. You can see the original line at the top, barely legible under the heavy black ink he used to obliterate it. Below that, attempt number 2, also crossed out. Then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each version trying to say something he couldn't quite articulate. Each version getting closer to something, then veering away at the last moment. The song was Pennyroyal Tea. Most people know the recorded version from In Utero, but what they don't know is that the lyrics Kurt sang on that album were written the morning of the recording session, improvised, never documented, and completely different from everything he'd spent months trying to write. Charles Cross, Kurt's biographer, was one of the first people to examine the notebook pages closely. In 2001, 7 years after Kurt's death, he was granted access to the journals. What he found on page 43 stopped him cold. "I've looked at hundreds of Kurt's lyric sheets," Cross said in a 2003 interview. He would make small changes, cross out a word here or there, but this was different. This was obsessive. He was trying to say something specific, something that mattered deeply to him, and he couldn't find the right words. The first version, written in early 1993, was the most explicit. It named someone, a person Kurt was angry with. The handwriting is aggressive, the pen pressed so hard into the paper that it tore through in places. But before the verse was complete, Kurt drew a thick black X through the entire thing. Version 2 softened the approach. Instead of naming the person, he used metaphor, compared them to something from nature, something poisonous. But halfway through the second verse, another X, rejected. By version 3, the anger had transformed into something else. Sadness, maybe. The lines became about himself, rather than the other person, about his own failures, his own toxicity. But again, before finishing, he abandoned it. Chris Novoselic remembered Kurt working on those lyrics. "We were at my house in early '93, Chris told Rolling Stone in 1997. Kurt had his notebook open and he kept writing and scratching things out. I asked him what he was working on and he just said nothing and closed the book. But I could see he was frustrated. Whatever he was trying to say, it wasn't coming out right." Version 4 appears on a different page. Dated 3 weeks later, the handwriting is neater now. More controlled. Kurt had clearly stepped away from the song, let it breathe, come back with fresh perspective. This version focused on consequence, on what happens when you consume something that's meant to terminate rather than sustain. The Pennyroyal Tea metaphor was there, but he was applying it to a relationship, to love that poisons, instead of nourishes. He got further with this one. Almost completed the second verse before stopping. No X this time. Just a line drawn underneath, and the word maybe written in the margin. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how to say it. But then version 5 appears 2 pages later, and it's completely different again. Dave Grohl, in his 2021 memoir, wrote about the recording session for In Utero at Pachyderm Studios. "Kurt was always changing lyrics right up until we recorded them," Dave wrote. But with Pennyroyal Tea, something was different. He kept the instrumental the same across takes, but every vocal take had different words. Steve Albini, our producer, finally asked him which version we were keeping, and Kurt said he didn't know yet. Version 5 in the notebook focuses on physical pain, Kurt's chronic stomach condition that plagued him for years. The lyrics describe the desperate search for relief, trying anything, consuming substances that might help or might hurt. There's less metaphor here. It's rawer, more direct. But again, halfway through, he stopped. This time he wrote "too obvious" next to the crossed-out lines. Version 6 happened in the studio. Kurt asked for a notebook and wrote new lyrics, while the band waited. This version, according to Al Bunny, was the darkest one. It dealt explicitly with self-medication, with using substances not to feel better, but to feel nothing at all. Kurt sang it once. Albini recalled in a 2004 documentary, then immediately said we couldn't use it, said it was too honest, said people would misunderstand. That take was erased. Standard practice when an artist rejects a performance. The tape was recorded over with the next attempt. Whatever Kurt sang in version 6 exists now only in the memories of the 4 people who were in that room. Version 7 was the final attempt before recording. Kurt went outside, sat alone for 20 minutes, came back in and told the band he was ready. Albini hit record. And what came out was completely new. Lyrics that don't appear in any of the 7 notebook versions. Lyrics that Kurt never wrote down before or after the session. I'm on my time with everyone, Kurt sang. Simple. Ambiguous. None of the anger from version 1, none of the explicit pain from version 5. Just a statement of fact, delivered with exhausted resignation. The final recorded version of Pennyroyal Tea contains 4 verses. If you go through Kurt's notebooks, you can find fragments of what became those verses scattered across the 7 abandoned attempts. A line from version 2, a phrase from version 4, but assembled in a completely different order, with completely different context, creating completely different meaning. Courtney Love, in a rare interview about Kurt's creative process, said something revealing. Kurt would get stuck on songs sometimes, she told Spin in 1995. Not because he couldn't write lyrics, but because he was trying to be honest and safe at the same time. He wanted to say real things, but he also knew people would pick apart everything he said, so he'd write the honest version, then bury it under metaphor, then feel like he'd buried it too deep, then try to dig it back up. It was torture for him. The question that haunted everyone who saw those 7 crossed-out versions was simple. What was Kurt trying to say? Michael Azerrad, who interviewed Kurt extensively for his book Come As You Are, had a theory. Pennyroyal tea is a folk remedy women have used for centuries to induce miscarriage, Azerrad explained. It's dangerous and often ineffective, but desperate people use it. I think Kurt was writing about abortion, or maybe about a relationship where that had come up, but he couldn't figure out how to address it without being exploitative or reductive. That theory gains weight when you examine version 1 closely. The person Kurt named in that first, angry attempt was female. The metaphor about poison and termination takes on different meaning with that context. But Kurt obliterated that version so thoroughly that you can barely make out the words beneath the ink. Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager, offered a different interpretation. Kurt was writing about himself, Goldberg said in 2008, about feeling like he was toxic to the people he loved. That being with him was like drinking poison. He was trying to warn people away, but also process his own guilt about the damage he thought he was causing. The notebook page shows evidence of this struggle. In the margins next to version 3, Kurt drew a small skull. Next to version 4, he wrote true but wrong. Next to version 6, just a question mark. What's striking about the 7 attempts is how the emotional content shifted. It started with anger at someone else. By the middle versions, it had turned inward, become about self-hatred and guilt. By the final versions, it had transformed into something more complex. Resignation mixed with defiance. Acknowledgement of pain without surrender to it. But the version he actually recorded and released contains almost none of that emotional journey. The final Pennyroyal Tea is opaque, deliberately vague. It's impossible to tell if he's singing about physical pain, emotional pain, addiction, abortion, toxic relationships, or something else entirely. And that ambiguity was clearly intentional. Barrett Jones, who engineered some of Nirvana's early recordings, observed something about Kurt's process. He would write these incredibly raw, confessional lyrics in his notebooks, Jones said. Then when it came time to record, he'd change them, make them vaguer. He told me once that he didn't want to give people easy answers, didn't want his songs to be reduced to simple explanations. The 7 crossed-out versions of Pennyroyal Tea represent that conflict, the desire to be understood versus the fear of being misunderstood. The need to express pain versus the exhaustion of having that pain constantly analyzed and commodified. Steve Albini, who produced In Utero, had the clearest view of what happened that day in the studio. Kurt came in with pages of lyrics he'd been working on. Albini told Mojo in 2013, but when he got behind the mic, he sang something different. I asked him about it afterward, and he said the written versions were too much. He said he needed to pull back, give himself room to breathe inside the song. That phrase, room to breathe, might be the key to understanding why Kurt abandoned 7 complete versions of the song. Each written attempt pinned down the meaning too specifically. Each one trapped him inside a single interpretation. But the improvised final version, the one he never wrote down, left space, left mystery, left room for the song to mean different things at different times. The tragedy, of course, is that we'll never know what those 7 versions fully contained. The ink is too thick in places, the handwriting too degraded. Kurt's handwriting was notoriously difficult to read even when he wasn't actively trying to obliterate something. What remains are fragments, glimpses of a creative process that was equal parts compulsion and reluctance. In 2019, Frances Bean Cobain posted a photo on social media. It showed a page from one of her father's notebooks, not the Pennyroyal Tea page, but a different song. The page was covered in crossed-out lines, rewrites, false starts. Her caption was simple: he was never satisfied, always searching for the right words. That might be the most honest assessment of what those 7 versions represent, not procrastination or perfectionism, but an artist searching for truth in language, finding it, then questioning whether that truth should be spoken or should remain private. The final recorded version of Pennyroyal Tea was released on In Utero in September 1993. It received minimal airplay. MTV banned the planned music video. The song existed on the album, then faded into the background of Nirvana's catalog. Most casual fans couldn't name it. Most radio stations never played it. But for those who knew about the 7 crossed-out versions, about the obsessive rewriting, about the struggle Kurt went through trying to express something he ultimately chose to obscure, Pennyroyal Tea became something else. Evidence of an artist's private battle with his own honesty. Proof that sometimes the most important thing about art isn't what's said, but what remains unsaid. Courtney Love kept Kurt's notebooks after his death. She shared fragments over the years, allowed certain pages to be published in books and exhibitions, but she's also kept some private. There are things in those notebooks that are just for him, she said. Things he wrote and crossed out for a reason. Things that shouldn't be dug up and analyzed just because people are curious. The 7 versions of Pennyroyal Tea exist in that liminal space, partially visible, but mostly obscured, available for examination, but resistant to definitive interpretation. Like so much of Kurt's work, they reveal and conceal simultaneously. What we know for certain is this: Kurt Cobain spent months trying to write one song. He attempted 7 complete versions. He rejected all of them, and when he finally recorded the song, he sang lyrics he'd never written down, lyrics that came from somewhere other than careful composition, somewhere more immediate and less considered. Maybe that's the real story. Not what Kurt was trying to say in those 7 crossed-out versions, but what he discovered he could only say by not planning it, by stepping away from the notebook and the careful crafting and just singing what emerged in the moment. The song that resulted is one of the quieter tracks on In Utero. It doesn't have the rage of Scentless Apprentice or the dark humor of Rape Me. It's gentle, almost delicate. Kurt's voice is soft, the guitar minimal. It feels like a confession whispered rather than screamed. And maybe that's what he needed 7 attempts to figure out, that some things can't be written down and refined. Some truths only emerge when you stop trying so hard to capture them, when you let go of control and let the moment speak. The notebook page, with its 7 crossed-out versions, sits in an archive, a document of struggle and revision and ultimately, surrender. Not surrender to the pain he was writing about, but surrender to the impossibility of perfecting its expression, an acceptance that some songs will never be finished in the notebook. They have to be completed in the air, in real time, unrehearsed and unrepeatable. Kurt Cobain never explained why he crossed out 7 versions of Pennyroyal Tea, never discussed the obsessive rewriting in interviews, never offered interpretation or context. He sang the final version once, it was captured on tape, and that was the end of the story. But the 7 crossed-out attempts remain, silent testimony to a process, to an artist wrestling with truth and its consequences, to someone trying desperately to say something important, then choosing at the last moment to say it differently, or more quietly, or not at all.